For people of a certain age, you remember where you were in 1989 when you heard about what came to be known as the Montreal Massacre. 14 women, mostly engineering students, shot dead by a ranting gunman at the École Polytechnique. It remains the worst mass shooting in Canadian history. It changed this country, and certainly women in engineering then and since. With us now to reflect on that profession in the past 30 years, Nancy Hill, President of Professional Engineers Ontario, Laura Conquergood, Vice President of Operations at Baylis Medical, and Shivani Nathu, Smart Grid and Asset Management Engineer in Training for Hatch Limited. And we are pleased to have all of you here for this important program to remember such an important day in the history of our country. And, you know, we've all been on Twitter today just to see what's being said about this. And, you know, here's one. So I am Canadian and I have never heard about this. What exactly happened? This is one of the reasons that I think we need to do this program, because there's lots of young people and lots of new Canadians who obviously were not here 30 years ago and don't know anything about this. So we're going to tell them. Nancy, I want to start with you. Where were you and what were you doing when you first heard about this attack?
So I was a professional engineer at that point. It was through a friend who was also a professional engineer. We were getting together that evening and she told me what had happened, and you know, like with shock, sadness, certain amount of fear, we discussed the whole incident, and I think it was a little bit what next, too, because was it over? Because at that point, that day, there was so much information coming at you, and you didn't really know. Was it over? Was there more? Or was it a whole conspiracy? Or, you know, all that kind of stuff.
Right. For what it's worth, I'm never mentioning the guy's name who did this. You are welcome to say whatever you like, but I don't want to give him any notoriety he doesn't deserve. How old were you when this happened?
I was 10 years old at the time.
Do you remember it at the time?
Well, I don't remember the specifics around hearing the information first, but I do remember the impact it had on my household. My mom
should tell people why.
Yeah, my mom was a female engineer. She was a U of T grad from 1976. And she, you know, like many, and like Nancy and other engineers, were some of the first engineers that really paved the way for people like myself and the engineers today. And I remember how upset it made her feel and how devastated she was by the news. And just that emotion in the household was the part that I remember the most. And not so much really understanding the impact of it, but as understanding the impact it had on my mom and, you know, the community around her.
How devastated was she by the whole thing?
My mom was really devastated by it. She was, she's a very passionate person, and so for her, women engineering is something that she really strongly believes in, and is something that she has, to this day, still works to promote women in engineering. And so for her, it was, you know, it was shattering. It was, you know, a little bit of a wake-up call in a sense that, you know, there was these people out there that could take something to this extreme of a level.
Shivani, he ran into this place and he shot up the place and he killed a lot of people, and he killed them because they were women, and he accused them all of being feminists, like it was a crime. You were not alive when it happened, but do you recall when you first heard about it?
I think I first heard about it when I was early teenage years, so probably like 12, 13. I knew I wanted to be an engineer from the time I was around 10. And my parents were really supportive. My friends, family, teachers were all very supportive of this. And it never seemed like me being a woman was really an obstacle. So I remember when I heard about the incident, it really shocked me. And I had trouble understanding at that age kind of how someone could believe something so horrible and so strongly that they would do something like this. And I think it was the first time really that I realized that people had these beliefs about engineers, about women in engineering. And that as I've grown up and gone through education, it's something that I learned to see more and more amongst people and how women actually do face barriers in the profession.
It wasn't that he felt that way about engineers, because he did tell the male students to move aside.
Yeah, for sure.
He had a thing about female engineers. What kind of engineering do you do?
I did engineering science at U of T, specializing in energy systems.
And what do you do now?
Now I'm working as an engineer in training at Hatch. So I'm in the energy and power side of the business.
Okay, and how about you?
I am a mechanical engineer in training. I work in the medical device industry and run the operations for a medical device manufacturer.
And how about you?
So I work at the intersection of engineering and law. I'm a patent and trademark agent. I have my own firm. So I get to work with all these guys. So I've worked on medical robots for use in MRIs. I've worked on steel structures. I've worked on chemical processes. So I get my finger in a lot of things, which is pretty exciting.
When you went to University of Toronto, engineering school,
Yes.
so many years ago, how many male versus female engineering students were there in your class?
So at U of T, there was probably about 5, maximum 10% generally, and it depended on which
Women.
discipline. Yes.
5 to 10% of your class was female.
That's right. In my particular class of civil engineering, there was 6 out of 100.
Okay. Let's see if that's changed at all. How about when you went to Queen's?
Yeah.
What was the ratio like when you went there?
I would say it would be around 20 to 30% of my mechanical engineering class were women.
Okay, so that's 3 times as much between generations. How about you?
So when I started and when I was in my first year, it was about 25% women. We had a dean, Christina Amon, who was our first female dean at U of T, and that was one of her goals. So when I graduated, the first year class was 40% women.
40%.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense about what the profession looks like today?
So of professional engineers, licensed professional engineers, it's about 13%. Newly licensed engineers in Ontario, it's about 18%. So we're moving it, but it's slow. It's really slow.
Shivani, when you were in school, which is how many years ago?
I just graduated this summer.
This summer.
Yeah.
Okay. How was there any discussion in your class with any of your female classmates, or male for that matter, ever, about what we're observing tonight?
Definitely. We, as I was saying, mentioning to some of the folks earlier, we always build a memorial every year at U of T commemorating the event and recognizing the 14 women. So every year on this day around December 6th, we would talk about kind of what had happened, the impact it's had on us. And I guess we also made an effort to talk about the ways in which the sexism and the misogyny that women in engineering face has changed since then.
Can you help us understand what specific, let me, Nancy, start with you on this one. Are there specific things about engineering that make it more difficult for women to do it? Because you'll acknowledge the numbers are, there's quite an imbalance, male versus female, the ratio.
So I don't think it's the work itself. I think it's maybe the perception of what we do. So I think a lot of what we hear is that girls, when they're choosing, they're interested in helping people. And so they don't, and I think it goes back to engineering being the silent profession, in that a lot of people don't know what engineers do. And if you look at some of the research, most of the women engineers, students, had a family member or a specific person that they knew that was an engineer who, had sort of that one-on-one encouragement or something like that. So I think it's a little bit of we need to do a better sales job. And I think, when you look at the issue of helping people, I would argue doctors help people one person at a time. And people like biomedical engineers, like water engineers, like roads even, they help us get places. They like clean water is...
You help people millions at a time.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I think we need to do a better sales job, or a better communication job in what engineers do and the impact they have.
Shivani, did you ever feel as if your gender were an issue when you were in engineering school?
I think it wasn't necessarily, again, I didn't feel that it impacted the way I'd be able to do engineering. I think there were times when I would have conversations with people or I'd be doing work and they would treat me differently because I was a woman in engineering. So for example, in group projects at the beginning, a lot of times the girl is given the job of report writing or note-taking, not actually doing the calculations part. Or if I was in a group discussion with a number of people, people would talk over me more often than they would talk over others.
That happened to Premier Wynne all the time in cabinet
Exactly.
meetings too. That's something, that's not particular to engineering.
Exactly. So I don't think it's specifically related to the profession. I think it's just obstacles that women face in general in any profession.
Did you find that when you were going to engineering school?
No, I don't think I found that. And talked about my history and that I had a very supportive mother who kind of, in some ways, was a really great model, role model to show me that, to be a woman in engineering was just something sort of natural and just naturally happened. I remember I had a poster that I don't know who produced it, but it says, "I want to be an engineer just like my mom," and that was on my, with the teen magazine posters, there was that poster there beside it, and so it just never came to my mind. But I think I had some similar experiences in that, it wasn't so much in school, but when I got out in industry, it was more as a female, sometimes I would be discredited. And I really felt like sometimes I had to do work to prove myself to who I was, or what I was and what I knew, and, my credibility.
Discredited how?
Just in terms of how much they would listen to what you're saying, and I'm really lucky. I work at an organization where it was, started by a strong female leader, and so inside my organization, I don't see that, but outside of it, it was. I work a lot in the medical profession, and again, it's in the specialties that we work in. It's a very male-dominated landscape as well, and so you'd be going to show a doctor a new device and explain it, and sometimes the attention that you would get and how I would explain it compared to the male counterpart would be different. And I found once you got past that initial sort of credibility piece, then they're all in and they're willing to listen to you like they are your counterpart. But it took more to get that initial credibility from them.
When you were in university, and you've told us it was less than 10% of the class that was female, did you have any issues with male professors, for example, who would look out to a class and see a sea of men and a few female faces, and I don't know, you tell me.
Short answer, yes. So I remember the very first lab I had was, I was the only woman in the class. And we went into this room and the TA explained really quickly how to use some machine. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm not gonna know how to use it if I don't, put my hand up and say, okay. Because at the end he said, "Did everybody understand?" I was like, "No, I didn't understand anything." So he pulled me up to the front of the class, not where I'd like to sit. Anyway, pulled me up to the front of the class, went through it very slowly. I got it. And then every lab after that, it would be lady and gentleman. They all turned and looked at me. And I was like, yeah, okay. So, so I did feel singled out at times, for sure.
I want to get your impressions 30 years after the fact of what you thought this was a story about. Because, needless to say, over the years, this turns into a story about feminism, it turns into a story about women, it turns into a story about gun control, it turns into a story about mental health, it turns like it can be a dozen different stories. And I want to know what this story is about for you. Laura, start us off.
There's been a lot in the media over the last couple of days leading up to tomorrow and the anniversary of the Montreal Massacre. And I think you're right, there's a lot of different pieces to this. And so if it really comes down to it in this day and age and where we're at, I think, the part that resonates with me the most right now is the mental health piece. We talk a lot about that these days and a lot of the things that are happening. And also the gun control piece, right? There's a lot to be said, and you don't have to look too far to see other examples where those things are huge in play in stories that are happening.
Indeed. Shivani, what is this story about for you?
I think, I've also been reading a lot of things leading up to the attack, or leading up to the anniversary tomorrow, and I think one of the things that really stands out for me is a lot of people are saying how a lot of the hate that was behind the attack is reappearing now in other forms and in other ways. And so I think it's really a reminder of the fact that a lot of these issues for feminism, sexism, violence, we talk about it as if it's something that happened a long time ago and it's not really relevant now. But I think we're seeing a rise of hate in the media, online, and the internet. And I think it's a reminder that this is something that we can't ignore and it's still a problem today.
Misogyny is still with us.
Yeah.
And do you still see evidence of it in your daily life?
I think I'm lucky to work in a really supportive environment, so I don't really see it at work as much. But I think there's a lot of microaggressions, and that's how I feel misogyny is apparent today. So instead of people outright saying, you can't do this because you're a woman, they'll say small things to discredit you. And it's almost worse because you don't necessarily link it to the fact that you're a woman, and that's why they're saying those things. And those microaggressions can build up over time and make you feel invalidated as a person when it's really just them projecting their misogyny this way.
This is a teachable moment. So there will be people watching us right now who say, I've had it up to here with the word microaggression, and you people are all just too sensitive about, oh boy, you people is not the thing to say after Don Cherry, but you know what I'm getting at here.
Yeah.
Can you give us an example of something that you would consider to be a microaggression, which to the person doing it, they're not even thinking about it, but on the receiving end, it's a thing?
One example that I've heard and seen lately is people will say, you only got this job because you're a girl. Or
People say that?
Not to me directly, but I've seen it online, or that you've only got this position because you're X. And I think in that sense, or example earlier, people talking over you. They don't necessarily think that they're doing anything wrong, but all of these little things adding up make you feel not credible. They kind of add to or decrease your self-confidence in that sense. And it's one-off, sure, it seems like something small, but when you add all of them up, it can really have a big impact.
Okay, that was helpful. Nancy, what was the story for you of the Montreal Massacre?
So now, 30 years later, I'm reflecting on really in my role as president of PEO and president of the regulator of professional engineers in Ontario. And what can we do to make our profession more inclusive? And are there levers that as the regulator we can pull to get rid of the microaggressions, to have a more inclusive profession? One of the things that we're currently doing is we have a task force which is called 30 by 30, which is trying to get 30% women, newly licensed women in the profession by 2030.
And you're at where now?
Well, given that the across Ontario, it's about 21% are in the schools now. It's a tall task, sadly, when women are 50% of the population. So, but the key is well, first of all, we have a great person leading our task force who is an expert in change management. So she's trying to pull us all along. But it's how do we institutionalize, and how do we make it throughout the whole profession, as opposed to a group of women identifying what the problems are and trying to make changes. Because we've done that for a long time, and that's not getting us where we need to be. And so, as the president, that's what I'm reflecting on. I agree with what the others have said in some of what I've lived over the last 30 years, but I want to focus on this in terms of what I can do and in my leadership role within the profession.
A terrible thing would be is if this guy who did this got a posthumous victory by having smaller numbers of women in engineering because of what he did. If he scared women away from becoming engineers because of what he did, that would really be awful. I don't know if you, in conversation with your mom over the years, have discussed this or considered that possibility, or whether it was even suggested to you that you might not want to go into this profession because of this.
It definitely wasn't ever suggested for me, and I don't know any of the actual data around what happened after this event and if it affected enrollment numbers in the years that shortly after. It'd be hard to imagine that there wasn't a lot of people who maybe didn't have the support of their families to go into engineering careers like I did, and it would have been another thing to put on the list. Well, remember what happened with those other female engineers? You want to be that person? And I'm not saying, and again, I don't know what the data actually showed from that standpoint, and if that did in fact occur. But it's hard not to imagine that could have.
I was going to say, I don't have data either, but it's reasonable to assume that conversation was had at the dinner table in various households. I don't know, was that ever a feature of your upbringing? When you told your parents that you wanted to go into engineering, was that ever raised?
I don't think it was ever raised in my household. My parents come from South Africa, and they grew up in South Africa under apartheid. So living under oppression and doing things and overcoming barriers was something that was usual for them. So I think in that aspect, it didn't really affect me in the same way.
Now, Nancy, you were in the profession already at the time, right?
Right.
Was there discussion at the time after this happened, maybe we don't want to make a living this way after all? Did you hear any of that?
So I think what happened was within the profession, there was a certain amount of self-reflection and identifying that this was actually a problem in terms of the low numbers. And there were, Ontario was fortunate that we had already had our first female president of PEO, and she was absolutely a trailblazer and a role model. So we had already started some of the work, but most of the other provinces hadn't. And it was a catalyst to have women in engineering groups across the country and really identifying that this wasn't good enough. And how do we create a community of women in engineering? And how do we, since then there was a lot of school programs and different specific outreach programs that were trying to get more women interested in it. But as I said, we haven't really moved the dial a lot. We were at 5% then, and we're at 13 now, so we haven't hit critical mass 30 years later.
I would like to introduce a very important additional voice to those at this table here. Joining us now on the line from Montreal, Quebec, Natalie Provo. She is a survivor of the Montreal Massacre and now a regional director with the Quebec government's Ministry of Sustainable Development, Environment, and Fight Against Climate Change. And Natalie, while we absolutely hate the anniversary that has brought you to be a part of our discussion here tonight, we are pleased that you were able to find some time for us, because we were saying off the top of our conversation here, there are lots of people watching this right now who either weren't in Canada then or are too young to remember it and therefore need to know what happened. So let's start there. Where were you when the attack happened?
Oh, I was in the first classroom where Marc Lépine began to shoot women in Polytechnique 30 years ago. And we were so surprised and amazed that something, I think we didn't really realize what was happening. And he divided the class, he asked the boys to leave it, and all the girls stayed together. And I don't know how a small conversation began with him, but he told us that he was there because we were feminists from his point of view, and he hated feminists. And I remember answering him back that we were not feminists, and that if he wants to study in Polytechnique, he can come with us. I don't think I was able to finish that sentence, and he began to shoot. And it was a really quick massacre. We were all close one from the other. Sorry, I moved because it's like I'm there. And then he was gone from the class, and I was there, and I didn't understood what had just happened, but I knew that I just died in a certain kind of way. It was the beginning of an extraordinary long evening that only ended the day after. And at that time, I didn't know exactly what was going on, but we learned the day after that Marc Lépine had killed 14 women in Polytechnique, and I was among the 14 person who had been shot.
What injuries did you sustain, Natalie?
I was shot at each leg, in my forehead, and I had a piece of a bullet that came into my left foot.
Do you still suffer physical health effects because of that?
In a strange way, yes, but it's the sense of your question. I haven't lost any capacity, any ability to move because of the massacre, because of it. But as I grow old, my scars and my wounds begin to hurt again. because the flesh is tighter. We are not as supple as I'm not as supple as I was 2, 3, 5 years ago. Sorry. I'm pretty tired today. I'm just coming from Polytechnique, and I may sometimes have difficulty finding my words. So, yes, right now I feel my injuries. It's not important. It's not very disturbing, but I know they are there still.
Natalie, we have videotape from the day, and this is what you said 30 years ago. Shelton, if you would, roll the clip.
What I told them is that we are just women who study in engineering. We don't fight to prove that we are women. We don't fight to prove that we are best of the men. And after I have told him that, maybe he answered something, but I didn't understand because he began to shout us.
Natalie, I have to say, you look incredibly resilient in that interview, despite what you have just gone through. Do you remember, do you remember that moment, and do you remember feeling particularly strong? Because you sure looked very strong in that moment.
I think it's one of the most amazing moments of my life. I remember it really clearly, and I also remember how calm I felt, how peaceful with myself I was. I knew I was doing the right thing at the right moment. But it moves me a lot to see me or to hear me like that, because I'm so young.
What were you 18 then, or how old?
23.
23.
Yeah. But you shouldn't have asked, because now everybody knows how old I am now.
Yes, we're doing the math in our heads right now. All right, well, I asked you a moment ago about physically what the after effects were, and you explained that. And I'm now going to ask you the obvious follow-up question, which is, you're doing a lot of interviews about this anniversary. You have visited the spot of this terrible tragedy. Emotionally, how are you today?
Oh, I don't know how I did it, but I know that I've been through something like the post-traumatic syndrome process to heal. I can look at it with a certain distance to feel comfortable, and almost to feel like if it has been something happening to somebody else than myself. 30 years after, I know that all the emotions, all the sadness, all the colère, ire, I have is somewhere inside of me, but it's buried inside. It's buried below what is marvelous in life also. So I'm not obliged. I don't have to go there to remember. I can also have a more cold posture looking at it. And I also understood with the years that I've been through a very intimate and private event that day. And that private and intimate event will always be mine, and will always remain not secret, it's not the right word. It will remain mine. But I'm very happy. I appreciate. I think it's important that we remember collectively of the event, of what happened, because there was a private event, but there's also was a social event that has impact on everybody who was there, and an impact on our whole society, because this unimaginable gesture that Marc Lépine did was we have to think about it. We have to begin a discussion about it. I thought that that discussion would begin maybe 3 years after, but it was too short. We were too shocked by what was happening. So I'm very proud, happy. Those are not the right word, but sorry, I cannot clearly express what I mean, but I think it's important that now we are able to begin a real discussion, a real thinking of what happened, why it happened, what can we do now, without looking at whose fault it is, because it's only one person's fault. But we are all responsible of our society. And I think that now we can begin talking about that.
I understand. Tell me this. Before you joined us, we were having a conversation about what this was a story about. Was it about misogyny? Was it about feminism? Was it about mental health? Was it about guns? We had a discussion about that. I presume in the years, over the last 30 years, you've had an opportunity to think about what this was. How do you answer that question?
I think it's all of that.
All of it.
Sorry. Marc Lépine was totally desperate, and he was not able to find a way in his own life, to find hope in his own life. And probably he had a problem of mental health. I'm sure about that. But he was also an intelligent man, and he had a purpose. He did not just shoot on people. He clearly expresses why and how and his goal in doing it. And he didn't choose anything. He chose women studying in engineering, and he wrote what it meant for him. His letter is clear. So it was about feminism, and it was an anti-feminism act, for sure. I have no doubt about that. And it's also a gun problem, because we in 2019, with the law that are active in Canada right now, we have a less strong system to protect us against guns in Canada. It was stronger in 1989. The commerce is different. We can exchange using public network, social networks. The gun manufacturers created a market for the individuals. Their first market is still the army and the police, but they developed the personal market. It was not true in 1989. So we have to think about all those questions when we think about Polytechnique. And when we want to be a better society, I think we have to look at all these aspects.
Natalie, I have a minute left, and I want to ask you one more very odd question. I don't say this man's name, and nobody on our program has said his name so far, except you. You've mentioned his name 3 times.
Yep.
And I do wonder why do you do that?
Because I know him. I met him. He has a name. He was a real person in front of me. He was not imaginary. He was not symbol. He was a guy. And that guy has a name. I don't know if it's what I should do, but I still can name all my classmates too. They were my classmates, and I know who they were, and I can recognize them. So, sorry, it's so spontaneous to name him.
Oh, trust me, you don't need to apologize to me for your choice to name him. I've always been afraid of giving him more attention and notoriety than he deserves. I've always felt that the women were the story, not him. But maybe I'm wrong in that. Maybe the issues that he was facing, you may be more, you may have more empathy towards him than I feel I'm capable of giving at this moment. I don't know. You tell me.
I'm so sad this guy had to do it to live. It's so sad. It's awful. I'm sure he was desperate. I'm sure there was no hope in his life. And I really do not approve. I cannot excuse what he did. but I'm sure there was a very, very, very great hole, a trou in his soul to do something like that. And I hope that if around me there's somebody so desperate that I'll be able to help before.
Natalie Provo, we cannot thank you enough for joining us tonight on TVO and helping us understand this story 30 years later. We're so grateful. Merci beaucoup, madame.
Merci, c'est un
Courage.
vrai plaisir. Merci. Un instant. I want to thank everybody in Ontario, but everybody in the rest of Canada. You were able to talk about it much more quickly than we did in Quebec, and I think you helped us heal doing that. Thank you.
We appreciate that. All good wishes. And to Shivani Nathu and Nancy Hill and Laura Conquergood, we thank you for joining us on this 30th anniversary, the eve of, as well.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.